Welcome back to We Dream, a podcast by Dream.org, a national nonprofit working to close prison doors and open doors of opportunity into the green economy. Together, we're building a future rooted in freedom, dignity, and opportunity for all. This season, we're exploring how to reimagine a justice system that puts people over punishment, with a special focus on the Trump administration's expected crime bill, what it could mean, why tough on crime policies cause harm, and how we can push for real solutions. It's your Dream Team regulars. I'm Naomi Garcia-Hector.
I'm Janos Martin.
And we're super excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking about all things bail and bail reform. But first, and before we dive into our conversation and who our guest is, I hear some congratulations are in order. Janos yesterday was appointed to the Criminal Legal System Transition Committee for Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. Congratulations. That is amazing. Tell us about that. What do you look forward to in that role?
Thank you. Very excited about it. It's a great team of fellow criminal justice leaders who have been appointed to that committee. For transition teams, what these committees tend to do is figure out which policies the new administration needs to really look into and perhaps change from the previous administration, and also figure out who are the right people for those roles. So, with a new mayor coming in with a vision for public safety that I'm very much behind, I look forward to being helpful in all the ways I can.
Janos is based in New York. That's his hometown. So that's probably relevant to any listeners who don't know that. So he's a New Yorker. Alrighty, so today's episode, like I said, we're going to talk about bail reform. Why is this something that's important to get into the weeds about, specifically in regards to the crime bill? And then who are we going to talk about it with?
Yeah, it's going to be one of the probably biggest components of the so-called Trump crime bill. And what I've found over the years working on this issue is that a lot of people don't understand it. People in politics, regular people, journalists, even sometimes in the criminal justice movement, it can get a little convoluted. So I think it's important for everybody to really understand what bail is, what bail reform means to the left, to the right, and to hear that from somebody who's been working on this issue relentlessly for the past decade and really can speak to how it's playing out all over the country. Erin George.
And Erin is from the Bail Project, correct?
Yep. So like the name suggests, this is what they do.
And so y'all go way back. You worked on the Close Rikers campaign together. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we were, Erin and I go back to when the Close Rikers campaign was just a small team of people working with a small group of leaders. And together we helped build a movement that was able to get the city to agree that Rikers needed to close. The thing that Erin took the lead on, and we're going to get into this today, is figuring out how to connect bail reform and other pretrial reforms to the concept of closing jails. You can have the right political will to close a jail or prison, but you need to have fewer people in jail and prison in order to make that work. And there's no lever that affects the number of people held pretrial more than bail policy.
Alrighty. Well, this is episode 3. Let's dive in.
Erin George, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
The reason that we want to have you on so early in this crime bill series is because bail is very much looking like it could be part of it. And when I think about bail or bail reform, it seems to be one of those issues that politicians, journalists, the public, even people in the criminal justice space are easily confused by. I feel like given how central it's going to be to this campaign, it would be helpful to have an expert on to break it down for us a little bit. Can we start off with just the basic question? What is bail? What does bail reform kind of mean in 2025? And what's a common misconception about it?
I'm really glad you're asking this question because even though bail and bail reform take up a lot of real estate in the news and the media, I think a lot of people don't understand what bail is. And so starting point, bail is actually a mechanism of release. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. I think that's a common misconception. Bail is not supposed to keep you in jail, and bail is not intended to be a punishment. It's actually supposed to help you get out of jail, right? It's supposed to facilitate release before you've been convicted and while someone is still legally innocent, and help to ensure that someone returns to court. So the idea is that if you're arrested, you or your loved ones can pay bail, agree that you'll have a ride to and from your court dates, or you'll simply sign a piece of paper saying you'll come back, and then you'll be released. And if you come back when you're supposed to, you've paid money, then you get that money back. And I think that brings me to the second point, which is that bail doesn't necessarily mean cash bail, doesn't necessarily mean money. It means release through fair and reasonable conditions. So there are actually many different types of bail, from personal recognizance, which is basically just a promise to return to court, to release with conditions, and you're agreeing to comply with all those conditions, to a partially secured bond where you or someone pays a portion of financial money, to cash bail and beyond. And what has happened is that cash bail has become the default. Judges primarily set cash bail, and that's due to a variety of things, not the least of which is that the U.S. is one of only 2 countries in the entire world that allows for a commercial bail bond industry that profits off of a cash bail system, lobbies to keep cash bail policies in place because they need a cash bail system in order to make money. Then the third misconception is that excessive cash bail that keeps someone in jail is constitutional. It's not. So it's unconstitutional that right now there are hundreds of thousands of people who are sitting in jails across the country simply because they can't afford cash bail. And there are numerous court rulings and settlements that are on these grounds that uphold the unconstitutionality of excessive cash bail.
That's a great summary. Thank you. So when we talk about the way that bail isn't working like it's supposed to, I think back to the Close Rikers campaign, which we worked on together. And a lot of people remember the exciting part about that campaign was getting New York City commit to closing Rikers, but you can only close jails and prisons if you're reducing the number of people in them. And so that's why it was so important for us to tackle pretrial reform. So can you spend a minute talking about what we did, really what you did in New York, and how that connects to just incarceration levels and really like what the success of that was, since we've been hearing a lot of griping the last few years about like what doesn't work about it. But frankly, it's been in many ways a huge success.
Yeah. So the Free New York campaign was really a Herculean effort by many people, and it really brought together movements that had been in place for many years. So it was a statewide campaign to overhaul bail, discovery, and speedy trial laws in New York. I think that's another thing that doesn't arise much in the news and the media. Bail reform is often not just about cash bail. It's about overhauling pretrial systems. So like you said, the campaign initially grew out of the campaign to close Rikers, but it quickly became a statewide movement because it became clear that jails across the state were massively overcrowded and that pretrial systems across the state were dysfunctional. And so it reformed discovery law. Discovery law is the process by which prosecutors are supposed to share case information with defense attorneys and with defendants so that people know what the evidence is in cases against them before they plead guilty or before they go to trial. In New York, prior to those reforms, New York had one of the worst laws in the country, one of the 4 worst laws. That led to really high rates of wrongful conviction, people pleading guilty simply to get out of jail, all while they were blindfolded to the evidence in the cases against them. Reform led to open, early, and complete discovery. So that means that early in the case, prosecutors are turning over evidence that they have in the case against an individual. That creates a safer and a more fair system. The reforms also fixed a loophole in New York law so that the right to a speedy trial, which we all hear about as a cornerstone from the time we're very young, is actually upheld and protected so that people aren't spending, weeks, months, years in jail before trial. I think many people, I should say, are familiar with the tragic story of Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years in jail because he was accused of stealing a backpack. So it closed that speedy trial loophole. And then, importantly, it reformed cash bail statewide by significantly limiting the use of money bail, primarily in misdemeanor and low-level felony cases. And despite what the media says, it's actually been an extraordinary success, right? So there's been a significant reduction in jail incarceration statewide, and that's primarily because it reduced pretrial admissions to jails for those low-level, nonviolent charges. And importantly, that did not have any negative impact on public safety outcomes. There's study after study after study that's demonstrated that. And that was exactly what the law was intended to do, right? When we launched the campaign, Rikers Island had roughly 11,000 people in jail on any given day. Now the average daily population is closer to 7,000, and statewide jail populations are also substantially lower. And we talk a lot about numbers, and that's an extraordinary number to begin with, right? That means that tens of thousands of legally innocent people each year are being spared from unnecessary incarceration. But I also think we should talk more about what the human impact of that is, because the numbers say one thing, but the human impact is another thing, right? That is tens of thousands of people each year who are able to return home to their families. They are not losing their jobs. They are not losing their homes. They are not losing custody of their children. Their lives are not being destabilized. They are not sitting behind bars when they're legally innocent, when they haven't been convicted and having mental health issues develop or worsen, substance use issues develop or worsen. And what we know is that instability is what creates harm, right? And we know
Yep.
that jails worsen that. And I think we take for granted that jails and the conditions in jails are actually huge contributors to a lack of stability and a lack of safety in communities. And so there's actually a protective mechanism that is created by reducing unnecessary incarceration. And that is an outcome of bail reform in New York State. I also think that what has happened in New York, and I think to a large degree, this is because what I said before, right? The bail bond industry thrives and profits off of a cash bail system being in place. And when you pass a law that says you can no longer assign cash bail for these low-level, nonviolent charges, they push back, right? Because that is cutting at their bottom line. But we also never said that bail reform was going to be the panacea for all things public safety. It has improved public safety. In places like New York City, there was just a report that came out from the Data Collaborative for Justice, recently in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, that says that actually arrest rates have reduced in New York City since the bail reform law passed, and the rates have stayed stable statewide as far as rearrest. But also there are many things that contribute to public safety, right? One is community stability, like I was mentioning before, but there are a lot of other interventions, right? And so it's easy for commercial interests, vested interests, to say this one law, this one intervention should have fixed public safety. But I think that when we look at the big picture, we all know that investing in housing, investing in community infrastructure, investing in mental health services, substance use services, those are the things that actually the big picture will create the robust, safe communities that we need. Bail reform contributed to public safety in a positive way, but we never said that it was going to fix everything.
Right. Right. And I think to that point, when I hear another misconception that I think critics are more than happy to exploit in terms of people not understanding the system, you'll hear about a person getting out who literally did have cash bail set, sometimes a high amount, got out, and then committed a crime. And then people are like, oh, it's because of our bail system. It's like, actually, this is even like without the reforms. This is just like how the criminal legal system works. But I feel like there is a concerted effort by critics of criminal justice reform and the bail system to just anything that goes wrong when bail is involved must be the fault of bail reform.
Right. And for far too long, we have legislated on criminal justice policies, public safety policies in general, based on single individual scenarios, and rather than what the overwhelming evidence shows. And I think that when you talk to people rationally in simple terms, what we want is a system that works for the whole, not for the single situation that we are fearful of. The system that I want, right, is if I were to walk out my front door today and I was to be arrested, I would want a system that said a judge needs to have some evidence that I am not going to return to court, or some evidence that I pose a risk to an identifiable person. Not a system that says I need to have this much money in my bank account in order to come home before trial when I am legally innocent and I haven't been convicted. When you explain it that way, I think most people agree, right? That is a system that is logical and that makes sense. But when we have media, press, and vested interests that are elevating one scary scenario, people are reverting to fear and then reacting to that fear instead of reacting to logic.
Right. So let's talk about like how the rest of the country is handling this, because with the Bail Project, you've gotten to work all over the United States, red states, blue states, purple states. What you're describing here, innocent till proven guilty, the right to a speedy trial, every person having their day in court. I mean, these are bedrock principles. You know, this is a country that prides itself on freedom. So you would think that this would play well everywhere. Obviously, we know politics is not that simple. So what has been your experience working on this issue in the rest of the country?
Interestingly, working across the country, and the Bail Project is uniquely positioned. We work both on policy and on direct services. So we have unique insight into both practice change and policy changes, and it actually paints a relatively positive picture. So we've provided free bail assistance, our direct services. We provide free bail assistance and transportation support and court notifications to individuals at sites across the country. We've provided support to 35,000 clients across the country who've returned to 93% of their court dates. And then we engage in legislative change and practice change in cities and states across the country. And in the last year, we published a report where we looked at a range of bail changes and pretrial changes across the country. And in upwards of 30 states, there have been 36 reforms that on the whole have been positive. That's across the political spectrum. And there's really no one-size-fits-all solution, right? So there are many approaches to bail reform. There are also those practical interventions. But you see policy change in red states, purple states, blue states. And that's because bail reform is not a fringe idea, right? It's a mainstream solution with strong bipartisan support. In just the last year, there have been successful efforts to defeat regressive proposals. Texas is a really good example. In just this last year, a bipartisan coalition was able to defeat 2 regressive constitutional amendments that would have expanded preventative detention and expanded cash bail, and then also were able to vastly improve a constitutional amendment that is a preventative detention amendment, SJR 5. It was just voted into law on November 5th, but it included really important due process measures. Some of them are unprecedented in the constitutional right to bail across the country. So it requires clear and convincing evidence that someone poses a public safety risk instead of someone being denied pretrial liberty based on failure to appear, which is a pretty low standard, right? You can fail to appear at a dentist appointment because you simply forgot that you had the appointment or you got a flat tire. It requires willful flight. That means you're intentionally not going. And it also, for the first time in a constitutional amendment to the right to bail, which again is a right to release, like I said at the beginning, it requires counsel. So again, because bail reform is not just about cash bail, it's about overarching improvements to the pretrial system, having counsel at that hearing is really critical. So that's a state like Texas where I think a lot of people wouldn't imagine that comprehensive due process might be included in a constitutional right to bail amendment. There are also campaigns that are active in places like Virginia, places like Florida, places like Oklahoma. Michigan had a very robust coalition that has continued to work on pretrial reform for years. And then there are local reforms that have advanced in places like Los Angeles. So the country is still moving along, and I think that's because it is very obvious that this problem exists and is not going away, right? When you have jails that are crumbling, jails that are overcrowded, conditions that you can't ignore. People are dying in these jails. They are falling apart. There are not budgets to take care of them, and the intervention isn't working. Something has to be done, and so bail reform is the obvious solution.
Well, congrats for the work in Texas, and well said. That point you made about the right to counsel, I think for people who live in coastal cities, it might be like, well, doesn't everyone sort of have a lawyer? And the reality is if you go around the country, there's so many jurisdictions where you don't get a lawyer for 30, 45 days or longer while you're sitting in jail. So I think attaching the right to counsel to pretrial hearing that's huge. Yeah.
That's right. And what's really exciting about this moment in the bail reform movement is it's so different than when you and I were working on bail reform in New York almost 10 years ago, which is so crazy. I feel like all the time I'm dating myself. But we now have the data, right? The data that shows that bail reform is effective. 10 years ago, we basically had D.C. We had the data from there, which, D.C. has had comprehensive bail reform in effect since 92. And roughly 90% of people are released pretrial without financial conditions, with extremely high court return rates, nearly 90% arrest-free. In New Jersey, after bail reform, pretrial populations are down 40%. since 2017, 97% court appearance rate. Violent crime is down 20%. It goes on and on. Harris County has misdemeanor jailings down by 20%. Rearrests are down $6.6 million saved annually. So again, I could go on to Illinois, I could go on to New York, but that's a range across the political spectrum.
Well, so then let's use that as a segue to dive into what the series is about, the crime bill, and let's start with DC because DC 34-year track record of success, and yet it's being targeted by these Republican. Well, it's part of the set of bills being targeted by Republicans in Congress. They're basically trying to eviscerate DC's criminal justice system, which statutorily they have the right to legislate in this area, but it's very disconcerting that they're going after, in this case, a bail system that's been proven to work, that has resulted in a much safer DC since it was implemented. So you can't make any specious crime argument about it. So can you talk a little bit about like what exactly they're trying to do with this DC bail bill, and then how it may relate to what and I recognize we're kind of speculating, but what it might relate to their goals for a larger crime bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your first point is exactly right. Targeting bail reform in DC or generally in the states and localities is about political gamemanship, and it's not about sound policy. So the DC bail proposal would do a couple of things that are super concerning. The first is that it would mandate pretrial detention. It would mandate preventative detention for a category of serious violent crimes, and it would expand those crimes. That is flatly unconstitutional. It violates Salerno. You cannot mandate preventative detention based on charge alone. There is nowhere else in the country that does that, and that is because it violates the Constitution. It would also mandate cash bail for a specific category of low-level crimes. They are mostly quote-unquote public disorder crimes, and a lot of them have to do with protest, which is very suspicious for a protest city. We are talking about Washington, D.C., where people across the political spectrum who vote across the political spectrum come to protest because it is their right. And so it is going to hamstring judges in those two ways, and is very concerning. And it has passed out of that. It's passed through the House and goes to the Senate. And while these bills have not gone through committee or passed through either house, we have seen similar proposals introduced both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives.
And we saw on the House vote about 24 Democratic defections. Many, if people saw the names, they wouldn't be shocked. A lot of them are sort of centrist for centrist sake, people who are in competitive districts. I think we'd make the case, and certainly after hearing you, like it should be easy to make the case that this is not an issue that you should be worried about staking your election on if you're talking about freedom and, sticking with our country's core values. But in the Senate, I guess our hope is that we can stop some of these bills because 60 votes would be needed, and Democrats in the Senate just need to recognize that it's predominantly Democratic states that have overhauled their bail systems, and it's resulted in great results. And this would basically be conceding a Republican talking point that somehow Democrats don't know how to run their own criminal justice systems.
That's right. Targeting bail reform is very clear that it's convenient to achieve other goals. All you have to do is look as far as the jurisdictions that have passed effective bail reform. You're looking at Illinois, you're looking at New York, you're looking at Maryland, New Jersey, Harris County, Texas, which is a very blue
Houston
county. Houston. Yep. You're looking, very blue city, very blue county in a red state. You're looking at California, counties and cities in California. And then again, you're talking about corporate interests. By attacking reform, there is a handout to the predatory, big money, for-profit bail bond industry, which operates to the tune of $2 billion a year.
That's all I kind of had on the bail questions. I really appreciate you taking the time with us, Erin. Do you have any sort of like parting thoughts on how we can mobilize to stop these bail provisions from getting into the larger crime bill, and sort of what message you have for Democrats and for people on the left who are to get fired up to stop this?
I think that's something we can all agree on, is that people on the ground know best about what policies work for their communities. And that is evidenced by the success of these reforms, right? Like I said, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to bail reform and to pretrial reform, and that's why we have variation in these policies, but all of them have come out successful. And so I think people need to come together and say, let us make the decision, let us organize together, let us organize with our elected officials in cities, in counties, in states, and pass the policies that we know work for ourselves. And I think that that is something that crosses partisan divides.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well, I look forward to organizing with you on that. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. It's Naomi, and I'm back here with our host, Janos. If you're interested in following our guest today on socials, make sure to check the links in the description. Janos, over to you. Any updates?
Yeah, since we had our last episode, we have been on the Hill in D.C. Talking about the crime bill. We brought a group of advocates from across the country to meet with Senate Democrats, and I think it went pretty well. We definitely have more work to do, but I think the message that resonated most with Senate Democrats is that this is not an administration that we should be giving more power to, and they're not done hearing from us. We made sure to drop information about the crime bill with every single Democrat in the House and Senate, and they will be hearing plenty more from us in the new year.
Sounds good. We're recording this closing on December 17th, 2025. It's our last episode of 2025. We'll be back in the new year with more episodes about the crime bill and about what's going on. And that first episode back will drop on January 7th. Do you want to give us a little teaser about that?
Absolutely. We've got two exciting guests for that episode, one of whom is an activist from D.C. who's been in the trenches trying to make D.C. a fairer and safer place for years and would be directly impacted if these D.C. bills end up passing. And we've got a very unique guest, somebody who participated in January 6th and was incarcerated for it. And her experience in prison is what led her to become a criminal justice reformer. So really excited for that conversation coming up on January 7th.
It's going to be a good one. I look forward to it. And before you all check out for the holidays, however you celebrate, if you celebrate, be sure you're connected with us here at Dream in our Crime Bill campaign. You can do so through the link in the description. That'll sign you up for our National Crime Bill Response Team. You'll get action alerts so that you know everything that's going on and when we can pull you in to help us in this fight. So for now, wishing you all a happy holiday, be well, and don't quit your daydream.